Okay, good.
Get my cat out of the way.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be able to present some of the main highlights of Flagship 3 and talk a little bit about the future and recommendations that we have for the 1CGR reform and different directions for research in this general area. I'd like to point out that I'm a co-leader of the Flagship along with Erwin Bolte from Wageningen, and he is here online as well. So if you have questions for him, then he's available. The cluster organization of Flagship 3 is that we have 3 clusters: policy environment for value chains, led by David Laborde; strengthening agricultural value chains, led by Jason Donovan and Alan DeBrow; and then the outreach and scaling up, also led by Alan. And I believe all of the cluster leaders for Flagship 3 are here today. So if we go down one level, down to what we call projects, the 3-level categories or sub-themes, we can see that 3.1 is divided into these 2 sub-themes: impact of agricultural policies on value chains, and improved trade macro policy to strengthen value chains. These are mainly IFPRI-led research themes with some participation by IFPRI. Food loss and waste along the value chain has a more diverse set of centers and affiliated research institutes, including SIP, CIMMIT, MSU, Michigan State, and IFPRI's in there twice. For 323, linking small farmers to dynamic markets, this is where we have the widest participation of other centers, and a lot of this is through open calls that we have each year for a new research on different themes. Risk management tools for the poor. Okay. Kind of give a list of activities that we're involved in. One of the main components of Flagship 3 research is policy environment for value chains, and this includes a lot of work on agricultural trade, on policy, and how these affect the incentives in individual value chains. Some of this is sort of basic infrastructure or investments in information that can be used for analysis. One example is the Agricultural Incentives Consortium, which is a database of trade and policy distortions. Because it's a big project, a lot of countries, a lot of commodities, IFPRI works with OECD, the World Bank, IDB, and FAO on this project. That image up on the upper right-hand corner is the web page for this consortium. It's a database of agricultural policies. MIRAGRODEP is a global CG model with 141 countries and or regions, detailed ag sector representation of bilaterals, and links to household survey data in order to map out the effects. Can you still hear me? I've got different screen popped up in front of me.
Yeah, you're breaking up occasionally, but just keep plowing through because we get 95% of it at least. So
can you see the screen? Should I share again?
No, we can see it.
Oh, yeah, Nick, okay.
Nick, it's Evgeny. It might help if you turn your webcam off, actually. Maybe it's just taking the bandwidth from you.
Okay, I'll do that.
Let's try that.
All right. Okay.
And now if you can go to full presentation
Expand
mode.
it again. Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go. Okay, so I won't read the list of activities here, but or projects, but these the models have been used to look at the cost of achieving different SDG objectives, at the potential for trade wars and how that would affect growth and poverty, partnership agreements between Europe and Africa, and so on. And recently there was a book on agricultural development and the global trading system, as well as IFPRI had a major role in this CERES 2030 report, which looks at sustainability over the next 10 years. I don't have time to go into it in great detail, but the trade policy group, the 3.1 cluster, is extensively involved with policymakers in the US, in Europe, and in developing countries, particularly in trade negotiations, in training trade negotiators from developing countries, providing background briefings for discussion, and they also had a significant impact on renewable policy, the biofuels policy during the price crisis of 2008 and 9. Okay, another area I want to highlight is measurement of post-harvest losses. Back in 2016-17, PIM researchers developed a new method for measuring post-harvest losses, which incorporate value, not just economic losses, not just physical losses. It also looks at losses along the value chain, not just at farm level. And it standardized the method by providing unified research instruments, basically questionnaires. It has been applied in numerous countries, something like 9 or 10 value chains. There's another 2 or 3 that are another 2 or 3 case studies that will be carried out this year, 2021. Results. Okay, I shouldn't go into too much detail here, but cereal losses are lower than the sort of standard cited reference of 33%, and losses are highest at the producer level, and self-reported measures tend to underestimate food losses. This research has been scaled up in various ways, mostly through collaboration with the FAO. The method and the results were featured in the FAO State of Food and Agriculture for 2019. I think something like a third of the citations in the back of that report were for IFPRI work. And FAO has adopted basic principles proposed by IFPRI work, the PIM work. And there's a creation of a joint FAO-IFPRI technical platform on this topic. Okay, and now the research is kind of shifting towards measurement of post-harvest losses. Hello? Okay. So the third area is innovative risk management. This has focused on research on picture-based insurance, which is basically a way of using smartphones to document crop losses. Farmers take pictures over the course of the agricultural season, and that this reduces the cost and increases the accuracy of monitoring crop losses for insurance companies, which allows them to offer crop insurance at a lower price than they could otherwise. The focus has been on India and Kenya and Ethiopia. The studies have focused on farmer interest, impact of insurance on risk, on income and investment. The research sort of suggests that combining this insurance with risk contingent credit seems like a promising avenue. There's also been uptake in India, where the government has commissioned a series of studies to examine the potential for using smartphone imagery to improve yield predictions. There's also some work on a larger scale, a sort of a macro scale of assessing risk capacity and the potential for risk pooling to reduce the risk of a large losses due to a drought, say. In terms of other areas, we're doing funding research on quality certification, incorporating gender into value chain assessments, scaling up of value chain innovations, a series of other ones that I don't have time to go into. In terms of capacity development, we're working with a network of something like 150 African economic analysts through the AgroDep network. And we're also funding work of PhD students at Wageningen University who are looking at value chain topics in sub-Saharan Africa and I guess in one case in Indonesia. Publications, you can see two of the books that have come out. This value chain development for the poor is literally hot off the press, not literally hot, but literally right off the press. PIM research has been published in very reputable journals that are listed here. In terms of outreach, we have the Tools for Value Chain website, a series of blogs and webinars, and annual workshops, at least up until 2020. We will be organizing another one in 2021. Okay, lessons learned. There are a lot of lessons to talk about. I'm just going to mention three of them here. I think one is the challenge of integrating macro and micro work. Originally, we had hoped that the macro work would sort of identify value chains that needed further investigation by micro researchers. In practice, they tend to be a bit more independent than that. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. There are just a series of constraints, including funding and previous experience and locally identified problems that mean that we can't always identify the value chains that we work on a micro level from the macro work. The value of collaboration among CG centers and with other institutions. The Ag Incentive Consortium is a great example of that, but also the dissemination of post-harvest loss methods through the FAO and the World Bank is another example. And then we had initially set up these regional hubs. I think that they worked well at a certain level, but they were sort of very specific to the center and the country in those regions. They didn't seem to contribute to a CGR-wide view of a standardization, I guess, of value chain methods. So we have shifted to other ways to promote an international community of practice that I've discussed before. Okay, for looking into the present and near future, we're continuing to fund our core activities, and we are funding a number of synthesis papers and working towards milestones. I won't read all of these, but you can see that these are basically summaries or trying to bring together the lessons from various research themes within PIM. And so in the interest of time, I'll just skip to the next slide, which is covering the idea that we are also doing research on, funding research on the impact of COVID-19 on food supply chains. And we have a policy tracker to monitor the effects on policy, particularly food export constraints, limits. And we're also funding a series of phone surveys to assess the impact of COVID-19 on food value chains. You can see the list of countries and commodities here. I think what's particularly interesting about this is that almost all of these will be using standardized questionnaires for farmers, traders, and processors, so that will allow greater comparability across these studies and allow us to say something interesting about the overall effect of COVID-19 on food supply chains. Okay, I am coming up on 15 minutes, so I'll just mention these priority research questions for 1CGR briefly. I think there's we see a lot of potential for more work on competition in local and global markets. There's a lot of suspicion that market power is being exerted, particularly by wholesalers and processors. We've done some work on that, but I think there's room to expand further. Risk and resilience in food systems obviously is a very hot topic, particularly not just in terms of drought and natural disaster, but also in terms of pandemics and other shocks to the system. How can we make food systems more resilient to those shocks? The potential of information and communication technology. Obviously, information is a key commodity within agricultural value chains, and the growing ownership of mobile phones in developing countries, almost universal in many countries and a majority in almost every African country, I believe, makes it possible to develop new methods for reaching farmers and disseminating information to them, but there's still work to be done in terms of what's the best way to gather that content and to deliver it. And then final three items, political economy of reform. Obviously, a lot of agricultural trade policy is driven by the winners and losers and their ability to influence policymakers. So we think there's potential for looking at this in greater detail. Second, a lot of trade and market analysis is hampered by missing data, particularly for trade patterns within countries and cross-border informal trade. So new tools and methods are needed to fill that gap. And then finally, the future of multilateralism. There's growing skepticism about the benefits of trade and multilateral organizations. And this affects a wide range, or it affects the range of likely and possible policies, which implies a need for assessment of new scenarios such as protectionism and trade war and how they would affect poverty and food security globally. And that is the end. Thank you very much.